Welcome to our Pirkei Avot Shir, as we're still on chapter 2, and we're about to start Mishna 7, and our Shir is respectfully dedicated to Levy ben Moshe Esther and Elisheva Yael bat Levy, and also in memory of Shlomo ben Moshe Esther. Okay, Mike, what do you have to say about Mishna 7?
Thank you. So this Mishnah is very short in words, but it's a very strange sounding Mishnah. Let's start. Af hu ra'a gulgolot achat shetzapa al pnei hamayim amar la al da'ateft ashfuch v'soch Metayficha Yitufun.
It's
that is Aramaic. Oh, no wonder.
Yeah.
Okay, so translation is, moreover, he saw a skull floating on the face of the water. He said to it, because you drowned others, they drowned you. And in the end, they that drowned you will be drowned. So I'm very glad that there is commentary on this Mishnah, because it is a very esoteric sounding concept. But let's hear what, firstly, Rambam, we're going to concentrate on Rambam and Tosfot Yom Tov. So Rambam starts. The intent of this statement is that bad actions will return upon the head of their doers. As it is stating Mishle 5:22, the wicked man will be trapped in his iniquities. And also it's stated in Tehillim, chapter 7, verse 16, he has dug a pit and deepened it. And also in Sanhedrin, Daf 90 Omid Aleph, with the measure that a person measures, so is he measured. And it is something that is apparent to the eye at every moment and every time and every place, that anyone who does evil and creates types of violence and vice is himself injured by those same evils that he created, since he taught the craft that would cause damage to him and to others. And so, too, regarding anyone who teaches a virtue, in that he creates a good action from the good. A benefit of that action will reach him, since he taught a thing that will do good to him and to others. And the words about this in the verse are very good. He stated in Job 34:11, for he pays a man his action. And Tosfot Yom Tov gives a rather extended commentary, but it's quite interesting, quite esoteric. So, because you drowned someone, you were drowned, and those who drowned you will in the end drown themselves drown. One might ask, if we follow the chain back to its starting point, won't we find that the first one to have been killed did not kill anyone himself? Indeed, Abel, Cain and Abel, Abel, who was killed by Cain, hadn't killed anyone. If so, how did Hillel know that it was on account of drowning someone else that this person had been drowned? The second part of his saying, and those who drowned you will in the end themselves drown, is even more difficult, as this is not necessarily so. We regularly encounter cases of murderers who die in their beds at the hands of heaven. This question was also raised in Devorim Rabbah to Parashat Ve'etchanan, discussing the verse, he who spills man's blood, his blood will be spilled by man. Rab Levy also said, but are there not many men who kill and yet die in their beds? They answered him, the meaning of his blood will be spilled by man is that when man arrives in the future world, at that point his blood will be spilled. And for the first question concerning the first part of the Mishnah, I saw this Mishnah brought in the Talmud in Tzukah, Daf 53 Omid Aleph, and there Rashi explains that the body was thrown into the water and Hillel recognized him as a murderer. In Rashi's commentary to our tractate, he notes that in some places people do not recite this Mishnah, but Rambam, Rav, and all the other commentators have it in their text. Midrash Shmuel, in answer to the second question, explains that in the end, the phrase in the end, they will themselves be drowned, means that through reincarnation, which is an established belief not only of the sages, but also of Pythagoras and the rest of the wise of the nations, who Abarbanel mentions in his commentary to Parashat Kitzetse. He eventually will end up drowning. And he gives a rather forced answer to the first question, saying that the case of Abel is different because the sages say that he gazed at holiness, and Hillel, upon seeing the skull, assumed that it was that of a murderer and not one who gazed, because murder is more common than this gazing. And Tosfot Yom Tov states, in my opinion, it is totally untenable to claim that Hillel said something that could only be understood through the doctrine of reincarnation, which is an esoteric doctrine and which ought to be concealed from all but the select few that Hashem calls upon. And Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, the redactor of the Mishnah, would not have put this dictum in our Mishnah. For just as a verse in the Tanakh must always be readable in its plain sense, in addition to whatever other meanings it may harbor, the words of a Mishnah must always be readable in a plain way that all understands. And if there were only a Kabbalistic interpretation to this Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi would have left it an oral teaching, along with the other Kabbalistic teachings that remain oral and were not included in this Mishnah. Besides, the Mishnayot seem to be out of order, for since this is merely something that Hillel said on a particular occasion, it shouldn't have been included amongst the other Mishnayot, which are all of the he used to say type, i.e. ethical teachings that were constantly being emphasized and should rather have been appended to the end of this series of Mishnayot. All the more so since the Mishnah is in Aramaic and shouldn't come between two Mishnayot that are in Hebrew. Also, Hillel is speaking in the second person, directing his words towards the skull itself. Why wouldn't he have turned towards his listeners and addressed them? He should have said, because he drowned somebody, he was drowned, and those who drowned him will in the end themselves drown. Also, what is the meaning of the modifier af, even, also here? It seems that the Mishnah intends the following. Hillel taught in the previous Mishnah that an unlearned person cannot be one who fears sin and so on, in order to steer people clear of personal deficiencies. He also once saw a skull, etc., and from that experience onwards he used to say, increasing the flesh, only increasing worms, etc., in the next Mishnah, which is another list of personal deficiencies and virtues. This is because when he saw the skull, he said to it, and I quote, because you have drowned someone, etc., i.e., one would think it only logical that because you drowned someone, you were drowned, and those who drowned you will in the end themselves drown, because the measure one uses to dole out is the one used to dole out to him, as we read in Sotah 1:7. But this is only proper and logical. But regardless of what should be, reality contradicts this hypothesis. Many people who have never killed anyone are killed, and many people who killed others are not themselves killed. In order to bring reality into harmony with theories, so that it doesn't contradict the logical necessity that everything ultimately comes about through one consistent system and is judged fairly, he used to say from that moment on that, and I quote, increasing the flesh only increases worms, etc. And we'll see that in the next Mishnah. In order to accustom people to thinking that everything is truly necessary and just. For one does find overall that increasing the flesh only increases worms, etc., regarding deficiencies. And increasing Torah increases life, etc., regarding virtues. I just want to say this will make sense when you listen to the next Mishnah, which deals with these quotations. And he continues, it is evident then that the laws in place in the world are just and perfect, and we can infer from cases that are clearly just to those whose justness is concealed and understood only by Hashem. Those too are based on what is righteous and just, as per the verse in Ishaiah 55:8, for my thoughts are not as your thoughts, nor are my ways like your ways, referring to Hashem. It follows then that Hillel did not say, because you drowned someone, etc., because he felt it was certainly true, i.e. that of necessity, this is what happened and what will happen, but as a first premise that logic would dictate that this be so. But because there are well-known cases that contradict this, and these might cause a person to say that there is no judgment and no judge, Hillel began to regularly propagate his teaching that quoting, increasing the flesh only increasing worms, and increasing Torah increases life, etc., amongst the people. The intent is that we should use our experiences and sound judgment to conclude that just as in these cases the results follow logically from the action, whether for good or for bad, so also what befalls people in general follows logically, though it is beyond our understanding. Since the words, and I quote, because you have drowned someone, etc., are not an absolute statement describing what will happen with certainty, as it is possible that this drowned person had not drowned anybody, and that the one who drowned him might not be drowned. Hillel did not utter them as a public teaching. While facing the skull, an unhearing piece of bone, he said to himself that what ought to be is that because you drowned someone, etc. And the fact of reality contradicting this statement is also not at all explicit, but is implicit in his following dictum, that from this point on he used to say, and I quote, increasing the flesh only increases worms, etc., which the discerning will understand well as addressing this point. All such things ought to be said in such a manner as to be apparent to the discerning scholar, but not to all those listening, lest they who will not understand the answer, and I quote from Isaiah, decide by what their ears hear and judge by what their eyes see, that the question is truly difficult and has no answer, and remain confounded by it, and thereby falter, God forbid. Hillel said these words in Aramaic, the language of the masses at the time, per the Mishna in Shekolim 5:3, because he said them as though speaking to the skull of a bandit. He also did this so that people should take his words at face value, that it indeed the case that because you drowned somebody, etc., and for the discerning students he explained his words by affixing to them the dictum, increasing the flesh only increases worms, etc., which he said in Hebrew. This is what seems correct to me. So a rather lengthy explanation there of the story of the skull. And to conclude the Mishnah, he comments on the statement, and those who drowned, you will in the end themselves drown. Let's continue this. Although I hope it's not too confusing, but it's a rather esoteric subject. But this is the commentary. In speaking to this one skull, Hillel used the plural those to indicate that even if there were many who drowned you, they all will eventually be drowned, teaching that when many murder one, they will all be killed or brought to justice. This is from Midrash Shmuel. And I think, that's a good commentary on this Mishnah.
Fantastic! Yeah. It's a very, very difficult Mishnah, especially as we're introduced to the Aramaic. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but thank you very much for that interesting commentary on the Mishnah. So we'll be back next time, B'ezras Hashem, with the 8th Mishnah. Until then, we wish you a wonderful and fantastic week. See you.